Why did the general's question feel heavier than the silence that followed it? 13 rifles rested on their bipods under the pale morning sky. 13 of the most respected shooters in the facility. 13 failed attempts. Wind slid across the range at a steady angle, invisible but merciless, pushing dust in slow, patient lines. At over 4,000 meters, the steel target was barely more than a rumor against the distant terrain. You didn't aim at it so much as believe in it. General Marcus Reeves stood behind the observation glass, hands clasped behind his back. 32 years of service had carved lines into his face that no rest could smooth out. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. When he spoke, people listened because they understood what lived behind his voice. "Is there anyone here," he asked evenly, "who can actually make the shot?" No one answered. Some stared through scopes they no longer trusted. Others looked down, embarrassed, angry, replaying mistakes they would never admit out loud. The silence stretched, thin and uncomfortable, until it became something else entirely, a verdict. That was when someone noticed her. Riley Matthews stood near the far edge of the concrete pad, half in shadow, holding a clipboard against her chest like a shield. She was small, easily overlooked, wearing an oversized supply uniform that hung on her frame as if it had been borrowed and never returned. Her light brown hair was pulled into a tight bun, practical and unremarkable. Freckles dotted her face, almost defiant in their softness among so many hardened expressions. Her hands were shaking. Most people assumed nerves. They didn't look long enough to see the pattern. Jake Morrison noticed her because she didn't belong. At least, that's what his mind told him. Today wasn't a day for spectators, clerks, or anyone who didn't carry the weight of consequence. 3 Americans were being held somewhere far away, tortured while the clock moved forward without mercy. Every second wasted here felt personal. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, irritation spilling over before he could stop it. "This range is for shooters." His voice cut clean through the air. A few heads turned. Riley flinched, just slightly, then bent to gather papers scattered near her feet, pages that hadn't been on the ground moments earlier. She moved carefully, methodically, as if sudden motions might break something fragile inside her. Jake grabbed the clipboard from her hands and tossed it aside. Paper fluttered across the concrete like startled birds. "Go," he said, "you're in the way." She didn't argue. That unsettled him more than resistance would have. Riley knelt to collect the papers, her fingers trembling as she smoothed bent corners. Her breathing was shallow, controlled. The kind of control learned, not taught. When she stood, she didn't look at Jake. She looked past him toward the observation platform. General Reeves was still watching the range, jaw tight, eyes distant. When he repeated the question, quieter now, it carried more urgency than before. "Anyone?" Riley's chest tightened. She felt it then, the familiar pressure behind her ribs, the internal argument she had fought 100 times in 100 different places. Not now, not here. Stay invisible, survive. But something else rose with it, something stubborn, something tired of surviving. She lifted her head. "Permission to attempt the shot, sir." The words came out steadier than she felt. For half a second no one reacted. Then laughter rippled across the range, not cruel at first, curious, disbelieving, then sharper, edged with ridicule. Phones came out, smirks followed. Jake turned, disbelief flashing across his face. "That rifle weighs more than you," he said. "You can't even hold your hand still." Riley felt the heat rise in her cheeks but kept her eyes on the general. She didn't explain. Explanations had never saved her before. General Reeves studied her. Not her uniform, not her size, her posture. The way she stood despite the noise, the way she waited without fidgeting, like someone used to being evaluated under worse conditions. "Let her try," he said at last. The laughter faltered. Jake opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. Something in the general's tone warned him not to push further. Riley walked toward the firing line. Every step felt heavier than the last. Not because of fear, fear was familiar, but because of memory. The range smell of oil and dust pulled her backward through time, through nights she never spoke about, through moments she replayed in fragments she couldn't quiet. She set her clipboard down carefully and reached into her pocket, fingers closing around a small vial. Medication. Expensive. Unofficial. Necessary. She swallowed without water, jaw tightening as it burned its way down. Her hands were shaking worse now. She ignored it. The rifle was cold against her shoulder as she settled into position. 30 pounds of metal and consequence. She adjusted the scope without looking at the numbers, her movements precise, practiced. The tremor didn't stop. It never did, but she worked around it, between it. The spotter beside her glanced over, curiosity replacing boredom. He noticed the way she positioned her elbow, the angle of her shoulder. Not textbook. Intentional. Riley closed one eye, not to aim, but because blood was slowly creeping down her forehead from a shallow cut she hadn't noticed earlier. She didn't wipe it away. Distractions had a way of becoming excuses. She leaned closer to the rifle and whispered calculations under her breath. Distance, wind speed, temperature drop, the rotation of the planet itself. Numbers flowed like something remembered rather than solved. The spotter swallowed. General Reeves leaned forward, fingers pressing against the glass. He felt something stir, a faint echo of recognition he couldn't place. Jake watched from behind, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Anger curdled into something more complicated, the way she breathed, 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out, hold. He'd heard that rhythm before, in the dark, on a night that ended lives. Riley's finger rested against the trigger, not pulling, waiting. Her tremor synced with the wind, her body finding a strange harmony between weakness and force. Pain flared along her nerves, sharp and insistent, but she welcomed it. Pain meant timing. Pain meant she was still here. She took one last breath and released half of it. In the space between heartbeats, she squeezed. The rifle's report cracked across the range, echoing off concrete and steel. The recoil drove into her shoulder, fire blooming through her arms. She didn't move. 3 seconds passed. Then 4. The world seemed to hold still. Impact, the spotter said, disbelief cracking his voice. Dead center. The silence that followed wasn't celebration. It was shock, the kind that empties a room of sound because no one knows what belongs there anymore. Phones lowered, smiles vanished. Someone dropped a betting slip they'd forgotten they were holding. Jake stared, his chest tightening, recognition finally breaking through the wall he'd built around it. His wife had breathed like that, shot like that, saved his life once from farther away than anyone should have been able to reach. Riley stood slowly, the tremor returning now that the moment had passed. She turned away from the rifle, eyes down, as if expecting the ground to give way beneath her. No pride, no relief. Just exhaustion. And as the general stepped forward, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes, one unspoken truth settled over the range like dust after an explosion. This wasn't a miracle. It was a ghost remembering how to aim. Why did Jake Morrison feel like he was staring at a memory instead of a woman? The range stayed silent longer than anyone expected. Not the respectful silence of ceremony, not the awkward quiet of embarrassment, but something deeper, the kind that settles when a truth arrives before people are ready to name it. Riley Matthews stood where she had fired, her hands shaking again now that the moment had passed, the rifle no longer anchoring her body to purpose. Blood traced a thin line from her hairline down the side of her face. No one offered a cloth. No one spoke. Jake couldn't look away. He had seen that posture before. The way her shoulders squared without tension. The way she rose slowly, conserving strength. It wasn't confidence. It was survival. His throat tightened as images he had buried surged back with a clarity that made his knees feel weak. Helmand Province, night so dark it erased distance. Radio chatter fractured by gunfire. 8 enemy positions elevated above his team. 3 wounded. No air support. 60 seconds before they were overrun. And then silence. 1 shot, then another, controlled, measured, death arriving from nowhere. 7 shots, 7 impacts. He had called it a miracle at the time, because the alternative had been unbearable. "Who taught you to shoot like that?" he asked suddenly. The words surprised him as much as they surprised everyone else. Riley turned toward him slowly. When she met his eyes, he felt the final wall inside him crack. Her gaze wasn't cold. It wasn't defiant. It was tired, the kind of tired that didn't sleep away. "Experience," she said. Not an answer, not a lie either. General Reeves stepped closer, studying her hands, the tremor impossible to ignore now. "You're injured," he said, not a question. Riley nodded once. "Yes, sir." "Then why are you here?" She hesitated, not because she didn't know, because saying it out loud would make it real again. "Because I don't know how to be anywhere else." Something in her voice made the general look away. The operators shifted uneasily. Jokes that had been ready on their tongues died unspoken. No one wanted to be the next person to underestimate her, not now. Jake swallowed hard. "You saved my team," he said quietly, 18 months ago in Afghanistan." The range seemed to shrink around them. Riley didn't answer immediately. Her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides, a reflex she couldn't stop. Finally, she nodded. "Yes." The word landed like a controlled detonation. "That shooter command told us it was classified, that it was a unit that didn't exist." Jake's voice dropped. "They told us no one survived." Riley reached beneath her uniform and pulled something free. Dog tags slid into the light, worn and scratched. She didn't hand them to him. She just let them hang between them, heavy with meaning. Most didn't. Jake's breath caught when he read the name. Sarah Morrison. His legs gave way before he could stop them. He dropped to one knee, the world tilting violently as grief he had carefully folded and boxed burst free. "No," he whispered. "She wasn't supposed to be there. She was reassigned. She was safe." Riley knelt too, despite the pain it caused her. She stayed far enough away not to intrude, close enough to bear witness. "She volunteered," she said softly. "Last-minute replacement, classified beyond everything you've ever seen." Tears blurred Jake's vision. "Did she?" "She thought about you," Riley said. "About the kids. That's what she talked about when it hurt the most." Jake bowed his head, shoulders shaking. Around them, hardened men looked anywhere but at the grief unfolding in front of them. No one had prepared for this kind of battlefield. General Reeves cleared his throat, voice low. "The reports say Ghost Unit was lost, completely." "They were," Riley said. "I was the exception they buried." She rolled up her sleeve. Scars ran up her arm in precise, surgical lines, not shrapnel, not bullets, but reconstruction. A body taken apart and forced back together by people who refused to let it rest. "I died," she said, "for 4 minutes. They brought me back because I still had value." The words were flat, rehearsed, a truth she had learned not to decorate. A young operator near the back, the one who had been recording earlier, lowered his phone with shaking hands. Shame colored his face. "Why hide?" he asked. Riley looked at him then, really looked. "Because ghosts make people uncomfortable, especially when they survive." Jake wiped his face with the back of his hand, anger rising to meet the grief. "Someone sent you in knowing it was a trap." "Yes." "Who?" "That's what I came back to find." The general stiffened. "Came back how?" Riley straightened, pain flaring as she stood. "As a supply clerk 3 months ago." Murmurs rippled through the group. "I went where no one looks," she continued. "Paper, inventory, transfers, patterns. People assume nothing important happens there." Jake laughed bitterly. And you found something. I found a system, Riley said. One that trades lives for leverage. Dead soldiers make excellent secrets. She pulled a small tablet from her pack and activated it with a scarred thumb. Files bloomed across the screen, communications, financial transfers, orders changed minutes before execution. General Reeves leaned in, jaw tightening. This insertion point, he said, it was altered. Yes, Riley replied, 30 minutes before deployment. Jake's blood ran cold. Someone wanted Ghost Unit dead. Yes. The range felt suddenly too small for what they were hearing. And now, the general asked. Riley looked toward the far end of the range, where the target still stood, punctured clean through the center. Now the people responsible know I'm here. As if summoned by her words, the sound of engines approached outside. Black vehicles, too quiet, too deliberate. Riley exhaled slowly. They're early. Jake pushed himself to his feet, anger sharpening into resolve. Who's coming? Riley met his eyes, regret flickering there. Someone who knows how to smile while ruining lives. The doors began to open, and the past walked back in wearing a suit. Why did the air change the moment the doors began to open? Riley felt it before she saw anything, a tightening at the base of her skull, the instinctive shift in her breathing. The kind of awareness that didn't come from training alone, but from repetition. From being hunted before you ever learned to call it that. Engines idled outside the range, smooth and confident, the sound of people who expected cooperation, not resistance. General Reeves straightened. He didn't reach for his weapon. Authority, real authority, didn't flinch first. No one move, he said quietly, more to slow the room than to command it. Jake's fists clenched. He was still shaking from the revelation of the dog tags, from the image of his wife's last moments painted by a woman he'd insulted minutes earlier. Grief hadn't settled yet. It had nowhere to land. It turned sideways instead into something volatile. Riley stepped back half a pace, putting the rifle between herself and the entrance without making it obvious. She wasn't protecting herself. She was positioning. Habit again. The tremor in her hands worsened, then steadied, as if her body recognized the familiar outline of danger and adjusted accordingly. The doors swung open. 3 men entered first. Clean. Black suits that didn't belong anywhere near a firing range. Their eyes moved too much, cataloging exits, angles, faces. Behind them came a fourth, taller, silver at the temples, his smile already in place like a carefully chosen tie. General Reeves, the man said warmly, spreading his hands as if arriving at a social event rather than a secured military facility. I hope we're not interrupting anything important. Riley closed her eyes for half a second. Warren Blake hadn't changed. Same posture, same voice that sounded reasonable no matter what it was attached to. He had perfected the art of sounding like the safest person in the room. Riley had learned too late that safety and trust were not the same thing. Jake frowned. Warren, the name left his mouth before he could stop it. Confusion cut through his anger. What are you doing here? Blake turned toward him, surprise flickering just long enough to feel genuine. Jake, I heard there was an incident. His eyes slid to Riley, lingering for a fraction of a second too long. I see the problem. Riley met his gaze, didn't look away, didn't blink. Hello, Warren, she said calmly. His smile faltered, just slightly. I'm sorry, he said, recovering quickly. Have we met? 18 months ago, Riley thought, in a secure line that wasn't supposed to exist, at a moment when trust felt like oxygen. Yes, she replied. You told me the coordinates were adjusted for operational security. The room seemed to lean in. Blake chuckled softly. I'm afraid you must be mistaken. I oversee a lot of operations. Names blur. That's funny, Riley said. You didn't hesitate then. Jake looked between them, something ugly dawning. Warren, he said slowly, what is she talking about? Blake sighed the way a patient man sighs when surrounded by children. General, this individual is unstable. Our department has been tracking her for months. Severe trauma, identity confusion. She's constructed an elaborate fantasy around a classified operation that— She's lying, Jake snapped, stepping forward. I was there. Someone saved my team, someone with her breathing pattern. Blake's eyes hardened just a shade. Grief does strange things, Jake. Riley reached into her pocket. Several men shifted immediately, hands hovering near concealed weapons. She didn't pull a gun. She pulled out a small recorder and set it on the concrete between them, pressed play. Warren Blake's voice filled the range, calm, authoritative, unmistakable. Change the insertion point. We can't afford witnesses this close to the supply chain. The sound of blood rushing filled Jake's ears. Blake stared at the device, then back at Riley. The smile was gone now. You should have stayed dead, he said quietly. There it was. The truth always slipped eventually, not because people wanted to confess, but because they wanted to be understood. Riley's shoulders sagged slightly, not in defeat, in exhaustion. I tried, she said. General Reeves drew his sidearm. Stand down, Blake ordered his detail. They hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. Jake felt something in him settle, like a decision he hadn't known he was making. He moved, placing himself subtly between Riley and Blake, the way soldiers did without thinking when they chose a side. You sent them to die, Jake said. His voice didn't rise. That frightened Blake more than shouting would have. You sent my wife. Blake exhaled. She was collateral, they all were. The word hit like a slap. Riley flinched, not because of guilt, but because she remembered the sound of Sarah Morrison's voice in the dark, remembered promising something she hadn't been able to deliver. You don't get to say her name like that, Jake said. Blake glanced at Riley again. You see, General, this is why she's dangerous. She destabilizes good men. Riley laughed softly. It surprised even her. You destabilized them first, she said. I just survived long enough to point it out. She tapped the recorder. Everything you ever said to me is backed up. Locations, transfers, orders. Blake's jaw tightened. You think this ends me? No, Riley said. I think it ends the idea that you're untouchable. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blake's face. Outside, distant thunder rolled, or maybe it was aircraft. Riley couldn't tell. Her hands shook harder now, the medication wearing thin, pain blooming along old damage. She welcomed it. Pain kept her present. General Reeves spoke, voice steel. Warren Blake, you're under arrest. Blake laughed. By whose authority? Mine, Reeves said. And every man in this room who still believes loyalty means something. The operators shifted as one, not dramatically, not heroically, just enough to close ranks. Blake looked around and realized too late that he'd miscalculated. Riley's vision blurred slightly at the edges. She leaned against the rifle for balance. Jake noticed and reached out instinctively, then stopped, unsure if she wanted contact. She looked at him. They're not finished, she said quietly. This was never just about Ghost Unit. Jake nodded. Then neither am I. Blake was restrained. His protests echoed uselessly off concrete and steel. As he was led away, he turned back once. You can't outrun what you are, he told Riley. They built you. Riley met his gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor. No, she said. They just underestimated what I'd choose to do with it. The doors closed behind him. Silence returned, heavier now, layered with consequences. Jake looked at her, really looked this time. What happens next? Riley stared at the distant target, the hole still clean, still undeniable. Next, she said, is where the ghosts stop hiding. And somewhere far away, a clock began to count down again. Why did the countdown feel louder than the gunfire that followed? Riley noticed it first, not the sound but the absence of it. The range had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't shock or disbelief. It was calculation. Every person there was doing the same thing in their head, measuring time against distance, weighing loyalty against consequence. Riley had lived in that space for so long it felt almost familiar, like an old injury aching before rain. The tablet vibrated in her hand. Once, then again. She didn't look at it right away. She already knew what it would say. Some truths announce themselves before the evidence arrives. When she finally lifted the screen, the glow reflected in her eyes, pale and steady. 48 hours, she said, not loudly, not for effect. That's how long we have. Jake frowned. For what? Riley inhaled slowly. Before they make an example. General Reeves stepped closer, his expression hardening. Explain. She turned the screen so they could all see. A video file, already buffering despite the secure connection. She pressed play. The image was grainy at first, then sharpened. A concrete room, harsh lighting. 12 figures knelt in a line, wrists bound, heads shaved. Even through distortion, even through compression, Jake recognized the posture, recognized the way exhaustion curved the spine. His heart stopped. Sarah was third from the left. Alive, thinner, bruised but breathing. Jake made a sound that didn't belong to any language. His knees buckled, and this time Riley caught him before he hit the floor. Her grip was firm, practiced, though her hands shook violently as she held him upright. They've had them for 18 months, she said quietly. Ghost unit, the ones we thought were gone. The room erupted, disbelief, curses, denials. Operators crowded closer to the screen as if proximity could change what they were seeing. Some recognized faces. Some hoped not to. They're using them as leverage, Riley continued, and bait. The video shifted. A masked figure stepped into frame, his voice electronically altered but calm, almost conversational. Ghost 7, the voice said. We know you're watching. Come alone, or we execute them one by one. The screen went black. A timer appeared. 47, 59, 12. Jake stared at it, breath coming in shallow gasps. They're alive, he whispered. My wife is alive. Riley nodded, for now. General Reeves clenched his jaw. This is a trap. Yes. We don't send someone alone into Syria on a message from terrorists. They're not just terrorists, Riley said. They're contractors, scientists, people who learned how to hide behind ideology and paperwork. She turned away from the screen as if looking too long might shatter something fragile inside her. They want me, not because I'm special, because I'm unfinished. Jake pushed himself to his feet, anger burning through shock. Then we go in hard, full force. Riley met his eyes. There was no judgment there, just experience. That's what they're counting on. The room argued back instinctively. Suggestions, demands, strategies built on muscle memory and righteous fury. Riley let it happen for a moment, let the noise burn itself out. Then she raised her hand. It wasn't a commanding gesture, just a quiet one. They designed this, she said when the room finally stilled. Every tunnel, every camera, every reaction. A full assault ends with body bags and propaganda. Jake shook his head. So we do nothing. No, Riley said. We do something smaller. She pulled up satellite imagery, zoomed in, highlighted a section of terrain that looked unremarkable. They think this area is solid rock, she explained. Thermal imaging says otherwise. Heat signatures, tunnels, old ones. General Reeves studied the map. You go in there. Yes. And the rest of us, Jake asked. You make noise, Riley replied. Enough to keep their attention where they expect it. That's suicide, someone muttered. Riley smiled faintly. I'm already dead to them. Jake stepped closer. Not to me. The word surprised them both. Riley hesitated. She wasn't used to being anchored by someone else's certainty. Your children need you, she said gently. They already lost one parent. Jake's voice shook. And they get her back if I do nothing. Silence answered. One by one, hands went up around the room. Volunteers. Not because they were ordered, because they understood what was being asked and chose it anyway. General Reeves closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. I can't authorize this, he said, but I won't stop it. Preparation moved fast, too fast for fear to settle properly. Weapons chosen for reliability, not appearance. No flags, no patches, nothing that could be traced back to a name or a place. Riley packed last. She paused over a set of syringes, clear liquid catching the light. Her hand hovered, trembling more violently than before. Derek Hayes, quiet until now, noticed. What is that? He asked. She didn't look up. Insurance. For who? For everyone else. The flight to Syria passed in fragments. Engines. Dim light. The quiet scratch of pens as letters were written and folded just in case. Jake sat with his head against the bulkhead, eyes closed, whispering his wife's name like a prayer he wasn't sure anyone still heard. Riley watched him from across the aisle. She thought of the cave, of voices echoing where no one could answer, of promises made in the dark. When they landed, the night was heavy with heat and dust. Local contacts moved them quickly, wordless, efficient. No one asked questions they didn't want answered. At the staging point, Riley gathered them one last time. 10 minutes, she said. That's all you need to give me. And if you're not out, Jake asked. She met his eyes. Then you leave. He started to argue. She shook her head. That's the deal. The assault began precisely on time. Explosions tore through the night, controlled chaos blooming where silence had lived seconds before. Searchlights swung wildly. Alarms screamed. Riley slipped away in the opposite direction. The tunnel entrance was exactly where she expected it to be. Hidden. Ignored. She disappeared into darkness, her breathing steady despite the pain screaming through her nerves. Inside, the air was damp and close. Her footsteps echoed softly, then not at all as the tunnel widened. Scratches marked the walls, crude, desperate. Morse code. Alive. Her chest tightened. She moved faster. The first cell she found was empty. The second was. She checked pulses, marked doors, injected sedatives where mercy was still possible. She didn't linger. Lingering got people killed. Then she heard voices. American voices. She followed them. The medical wing was brighter than the rest of the compound. Too clean, too clinical. Sarah lay on a narrow bed, IV lines snaking into her arms, eyes unfocused but open. Riley felt something crack. She stepped into the light. A man turned from a console, face half hidden behind a surgical mask. His eyes lit up with something like pride. "Welcome home, 7," he said. Riley raised her rifle. Her hands shook violently. "This isn't home," she replied. "It's a grave." Footsteps approached from behind. The trap closed. Riley didn't panic. She lived in worse moments than this. She reached for the syringe and made her choice. Why did she feel calmer when the door locked behind her? The sound was unmistakable, metal on metal, precise and final. Riley didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The echo told her everything. She stood still in the white glow of the medical wing, rifle lowered but not relaxed, syringe cold and solid in her left hand. The man in the mask smiled wider now, the way people did when they believed they had reached the end of a long, clever plan. "Easy," he said, raising his hands. "We don't want to damage the asset." Asset. The word slid off Riley without cutting anymore. She had worn worse names like skin. Behind her, boots approached. 2 sets, controlled steps, professionals. They stopped just far enough away to feel safe. Sarah stirred on the bed. That almost broke her. Riley forced herself not to look yet, not until she could do it without losing the room. She focused instead on the man's eyes, bright, eager, hungry with curiosity. He was the kind who believed understanding something gave him the right to own it. "You kept her alive," Riley said quietly. "That was a mistake." The man tilted his head. "On the contrary, she's the reason you came." "I would have come anyway." "Perhaps," he said, "but not this fast." He stepped closer. Riley didn't move. She let him think it meant compliance. "Do you know how rare you are?" he continued. "Your physiology alone." Riley fired. The shot was controlled, deliberate. The bullet took the man in the shoulder, not the head. He screamed and went down hard, blood blooming across white tile like ink dropped in milk. The guards reacted instantly. Too late. Riley spun, firing twice more disabling shots. Knees, hands, no killing yet. Not unless she had to. She needed time, not bodies. She moved to Sarah's side, finally allowing herself to look. Sarah's face was thinner, sharper, bruises mapping pain Riley could trace in her own bones. But her eyes were still there, still fighting to focus. "Hey," Riley whispered, voice breaking despite herself. "Hey, you're safe, I'm here." Sarah's lips parted. "Riley," the name was a question, disbelief trembling through it. "Yes," she said, swallowing hard. "I told you I'd watch your six." A tear slid down Sarah's temple. "You promised," she breathed. Riley squeezed her hand. "I know." Alarms wailed now, louder, closer. Red lights pulsed. Somewhere above them, the distraction team was still doing its job. Time was bleeding away. Riley injected the IV port with practiced efficiency. "This will help you move," she said. "It'll hurt less." Sarah nodded weakly. "Jake." Riley paused for half a second, just long enough for the truth to settle properly. "He's coming," she said. "I swear." They moved together, slowly, carefully. Riley slung Sarah's arm over her shoulder, adjusting her own pace to match the unsteady rhythm of someone who had learned endurance the hard way. Footsteps thundered in the corridor. Riley ducked them into a side room, sealing the door manually. She keyed in a code from memory, a sequence she'd learned while pretending to be something smaller than dangerous. The door locked, temporary. Sarah leaned against a counter, breathing hard. "They did things," she said quietly. "Tests, questions that never had right answers." Riley nodded. "I know." "They talked about you," Sarah continued, "like you were a theory." "I was," Riley said, "until I was." Explosions rippled through the compound, closer now. The building shook, dust raining from the ceiling. Riley checked the tablet. 7 minutes less now. "We're almost there," she said. Sarah looked at her, really looked. "You didn't come out of this hole, did you?" Riley smiled faintly. "I never was." They moved again. The tunnel out was narrow, hidden behind a storage unit that slid aside with a groan of old machinery. As they slipped inside, a voice echoed behind them. 7. Riley froze. The wounded man from the medical wing staggered into view, one arm hanging uselessly, blood smeared across his lab coat. His eyes burned with something close to reverence. "You can't leave," he said hoarsely. "You're the culmination, the proof." Riley turned slowly, placing herself between him and Sarah. "You built a cage," she said. "Don't confuse that with creation." He laughed, wet and broken. "We made you survive." "No," Riley replied. "You just failed to kill me." She fired once. This time it was final. The tunnel swallowed them again, darkness pressing close, the smell of earth and old secrets thick in the air. Sarah stumbled, nearly falling. Riley caught her, heart hammering. "I've got you," she murmured. "Just keep breathing." The exit ladder came into view like a promise. Then the ground shook violently. Above them, gunfire erupted, real this time, not distraction, contact. Riley's radio crackled. "Riley," Jake's voice cut through the static. We've got movement everywhere. They're collapsing in. How long? She asked. A pause too long. 3 minutes, Jake said, maybe less. Riley looked at Sarah, looked at the ladder. Did the math no one else wanted to? Jake, she said calmly, I need you to listen to me. No, he snapped. We're almost to your position. You won't make it. Another explosion, closer. Riley closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. The decision was already made. It always had been. Take the North Ridge exit, she continued. It'll stay open if I reroute power. What do you mean, if? I love her, Riley said simply. You deserve to hear that. Silence. Then broken, Riley. She cut the channel. Sarah gripped her sleeve weakly. What are you doing? Riley kissed her forehead gently, finishing it. She helped Sarah onto the ladder, pushing her upward. Climb, she said. Don't stop. I'm not leaving you, Sarah whispered, panic rising. You already did, Riley replied softly. 18 months ago. This time I'm making sure it meant something. Sarah sobbed, fingers slipping then gripping harder as Riley's words anchored her. She climbed. Riley turned back into the tunnel. She ran. The control room was exactly where it always had been. Central, arrogant, designed by people who believed distance made them untouchable. Riley moved through guards like shadow and inevitability. She didn't savor it. She didn't rush it. Each action had weight now, clarity sharpening her movements. She reached the console and slammed the syringe into the port. Systems began to overload. Lights flickered. The compound screamed in warning tones. Jake's voice broke through again, frantic. Riley, we're out. Sarah's with us, please. Riley smiled, tears blurring her vision. Tell her, she said. Tell her she was never collateral. The countdown hit 0. The earth roared. And for the first time since she'd learned how to survive, Riley Matthews let herself stop running. Why did the silence afterward feel heavier than the explosion itself? Jake didn't remember running. He remembered the sound of Sarah coughing, alive, real, her fingers digging into his sleeve as if afraid the ground might disappear again. He remembered shouting orders he couldn't hear, and hands pulling them down the ridge as fire climbed into the sky behind them. And then there was the quiet, sudden, vast wrong. The mountain breathed out smoke and heat. The compound was gone. Sarah collapsed to her knees once they were clear, retching, crying, laughing all at once. Jake held her, rocking slightly, his face buried in her hair as if letting go might undo the universe's last mercy. Around them, men stood frozen, helmets tilted toward the glow in the distance, knowing what that fire meant even if they didn't want to say it yet. Jake pressed his forehead to Sarah's. You're here, he whispered. You're here. She nodded weakly. Riley, she asked. He didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, because if he did, the word would break apart in his mouth. The extraction helicopter arrived later than planned. Everything was later now. The pilot avoided the smoke column, the aircraft shuddering as heat currents clawed at it. As they lifted off, Jake looked back once more, memorizing the shape of the land. He told himself that somewhere beneath it all, the tunnels had collapsed the way they were meant to. Clean. Final. No more rooms without windows. Sarah slept against his shoulder, sedatives finally winning. Her breathing steadied. Alive. The word echoed again and again, fragile and enormous. Back at base, the debrief was quiet. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some truths didn't want witnesses. Files were sealed. Names were removed. What had happened would exist in a narrow corridor of memory shared by the people in that room and no one else. General Reeves stood at the head of the table, hands resting on the wood as if grounding himself. We recovered no remains, he said carefully. Jake stared at the grain in the table. You won't, he replied. Reeves nodded once. Her actions prevented future operations of this nature, permanently. No one asked for details. Sarah was moved to a medical facility 2 days later. Real doctors, real sunlight, windows she could open. She flinched at first at footsteps, at sudden voices, but she ate. She slept. She asked for water and fresh air, ordinary requests that felt like victories. On the third day, she asked for Riley. Jake sat beside her bed, fingers laced with hers. He had practiced this moment in his head and still wasn't ready. "She made sure you got out," he said softly. Sarah's eyes filled. "She always did that." "She chose it," Jake continued. "She knew the odds." Sarah turned her face toward the window, watching clouds drift past like they had nowhere urgent to be. "She was tired," she said. "I could hear it in her voice the last time we spoke down there. Not afraid, just finished." Jake swallowed. "I didn't thank her." Sarah squeezed his hand. She knew. Weeks passed, then months. The world moved on the way it always did, indifferent and relentless. Headlines found newer crises. The mountain returned to being just another shape on a map. But for Jake and Sarah, time behaved differently. It stretched and folded. Some days felt borrowed. Others felt heavier than the years they'd lost. Jake resigned his commission quietly. No ceremony. No speeches. He started teaching instead: marksmanship, ethics, decision-making under pressure. He told his students that precision wasn't about distance, but about restraint. That sometimes the most disciplined shot was the one you didn't take. Sarah learned to sleep through the night again. Slowly. She planted herbs on the windowsill of their small house and talked to them as if they might answer. She wrote letters she never sent. Some nights she dreamed of tunnels and woke with Riley's name on her lips, not in terror, but in something closer to gratitude. One afternoon, a package arrived without a return address. Inside was a notebook. The pages were worn, smudged with dust and oil. Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately: tight, slanted, efficient. Riley's. There were maps, half-finished thoughts, lists of coordinates crossed out and rewritten. Between the operational fragments were sentences that didn't belong to any mission. "If I stop, it means I've finally learned how to rest." They read the notebook together slowly, like a conversation resumed after a long silence. On the last page, there was a pressed wildflower, brittle and faded. Jake closed the book gently. "She wanted to be remembered," he said. Sarah shook her head. "She wanted us to live." Years later, at a quiet range far from headlines and fences, a small group gathered at dawn. No uniforms, no ranks, just people who understood what the place meant. Jake set a single target at extreme distance. He didn't announce the number. He didn't need to. Sarah stood beside him, the rifle balanced against her shoulder. Her hands were steady now, not perfect, human. She breathed the way Riley had taught her, the way survival sometimes taught better than instructors ever could. She fired. The shot echoed once and faded. They didn't rush forward to check the result. They didn't need to. Some confirmations were internal. Jake turned to the group. "She never asked to be believed," he said. "She just did the work." They stood there a moment longer, letting the wind pass through them, letting memory settle where it would. As they walked away, Sarah glanced back at the empty range. "She used to say dignity doesn't announce itself," she murmured. Jake nodded. "It simply acts." And somewhere beyond the noise of recognition and reward, beyond the need for names carved into stone, a quiet truth remained: that strength doesn't always arrive loudly, and sacrifice doesn't always wear a uniform the world can see. Sometimes it moves alone through the dark, carries others into the light, and disappears without asking to be followed. Sometimes that is enough.